Nastavljamo konferenciju sa panelom Propaganda 1999. do 2019. Šta smo naučili. Učesnici ovog panela su Ljiljana Smajlović, urednica liste Evropljanin i saradnica Slavka Ćuruvije 1999. godine, predsjednica Suda časti Udruženja novinara Srbije. Slobodan Despot, autor, novinar, izdavač edicije Ksenija iz Lozane. Jeremy Scahill, istraživački novinar, urednik portala Intercept iz Njujorka. Matthew D. Rose, istraživački novinar, urednik portala Brave New Europe, Berlin. I Dmitrij Šeluhin, pomoćnik rektora, zamenik dekana za Fakulteta za komunikologiju, medije i dizajn pri Visokoj školi ekonomije iz Moskve. Hvala vam svima što ste danas ovde. Ja sam Zoran Stanojević, urednik na RTS-u i bit ću moderator ovog razgovora. Mi smo se prethodno dogovorili kako bi razgovor tečnije tekao da panel vodimo na engleskom uz izuzetak gospodina Šeluhina koji će govoriti na ruskom. Tako da oni koji ne razumeju engleski mogu da stave sada slušalice za prevod, oni koji razumeju, a ne razumeju ruski mogu da ih imaju blizu kako bi mogli da čuju i šta je gospodin Šeluhin rekao. Oni koji razumeju engleski i ruski podjednako dobro, blago njima. So let's start with the first question. Is there a line that media may cross to become a legitimate war target? Jeremy, can you start first?
Well, I think that it necessitates us discussing what journalism is and what a journalist is. You could make an argument that as an example, if an American journalist for an American news organization is embedded with military forces and they have agreed that they are not going to report anything that doesn't go through channels of censorship with the US military, which has been the policy, you could argue that those journalists have become combatants in the war because they are in a situation where even if they know that a civilian village, for instance, is going to be shelled, they have agreed not to speak up about it. I'm not saying that they aren't journalists. I'm saying you could make a case that American journalists who are embedded with military forces are engaging in a censorship that ultimately is in support of one faction in a war. The reason I raise that issue is because in the bombing of Radio-televizija Srbije, the defense of that bombing was that these weren't real journalists. They were serving a role of propaganda for the Milosevic regime. If you turn that around, you could say the exact same thing about American journalists who are embedded, which is why I think that when we start saying who is a journalist and who isn't a journalist is a very dangerous road to go down, because it is arbitrary. It's all in the eye of the beholder. In the case of the war in Yugoslavia, it was victor's justice. The victors determined these weren't real media workers. These weren't real journalists. While you had American journalists agreeing to self-censorship as part of their reporting on the US military.
Yeah.
If we turn this around...
A microphone.
Oh, sorry. Just a little bit. Jeremy. No. I think this... Damn, okay. I think what Zoran also is asking is there any sort of behavior by a media outlet that is so outrageous when they're doing something which is not what we could say about RTS? I'm not implying RTS was like that, but is there anything that a media outlet can be? And I'm now going to use the example of that radio Les Mille Collines in Rwanda, where those journalists were accused of a war crime. They were accused of inciting hatred, and it's really a pretty good case. When you read the indictment, they were saying, go to that hill and exterminate the roaches. Now, I think that's a pretty strong case for a war crime, but I'd like us to talk about whether even such a radio station, it would justify bombing it, so it couldn't be calling on people. I wonder... I suspect this is also...
Yeah, that is, I mean, is there a line? Is there something that you can fulfill to become a legitimate target as a media? Dmitry?
Спасибо за вопрос. Вы знаете, я бы хотел немножко еще одну линию для дискуссии повернуть. И эта линия находится в двух плоскостях. Это, с одной стороны, медиаобразование, потому что мы с вами говорим сейчас только о журналистике, говорим о том, что мы с вами, да, как профессиональные журналисты, могут сделать. И воспринимаем все-таки не субъектно тех, кому мы информацию доставляем. А большая роль именно субъектности нашего потребителя, она является важным фактором. И работа в двух плоскостях. С одной стороны, это повышение медиаграмотности потребителя, с одной стороны. А с другой стороны, использование современных диджитал-технологий, направленных на создание нового инструментария, позволяющего проводить факт-чекинг информации довольно-таки простыми способами, в том числе используя современные методы, в том числе распределенных реестров, может существенно поменять пространство понимания, о чем мы говорим. Вообще, если говорить о журналисте сегодня, то я бы хотел сказать еще такой тезис, что журналист — это человек вне гражданства. Он может иметь гражданство, он может иметь приоритеты, но на уровне информирования он не американский и не русский журналист, он просто журналист.
But if I may persist a little bit, would you say that there is a line to be crossed so we can consider some journalist a target?
So,
Dimitri first.
so I'll be happy to answer that. I think it would be wrong even to bomb that radio station in Rwanda, because first, I don't think even the radio station that's inciting, that's really calling people to kill other people in a genocidal manner, I don't buy it that would be the way to stop them. There are 100 other ways to stop that without resorting to that level of violence. So in the same way that sometimes it's not justified to kill someone and their family and their children if they did something wrong, and I'm now drawing a parallel to the Israel-Palestine situation. So I am not sure that there's anything a media outlet would do, even it's truly reprehensible, that you could say, okay, NATO was right to bomb it and kill the makeup artist.
Dimitri.
Я бы не стал вообще делить журналистов и отделять его от общего населения. С гуманитарной точки зрения мы не должны оправдывать никакое насилие ни против журналистов и не против вообще мирного населения. Поэтому, когда мы говорим о разделении, да, есть журналисты, есть не журналисты, мне кажется, в новом мире это не всегда оправдано. Практически современные новые медиа, социальные медиа, позволяют каждому из нас быть источником информации. Поэтому, как я вижу, в новой мировой парадигме разделение на журналиста и создателя контента, оно очень условное. Новая концепция, по моему мнению, должна подразумевать все-таки общие гуманитарные ценности, независимо, какую функцию, роль ты в социуме выполняешь.
Matthew.
I find it's a very, very dangerous discussion that we're conducting, because we're trying to determine where is a journalist a combatant and where not. And this is a very complicated process. I think we have to define, as Dimitri just did, a journalist as a civilian. What is a civilian? That's someone who's not a member of the armed forces, is not wearing a uniform of the army, and is not carrying a weapon. In the case that you've mentioned with Rwanda, these are things your justice system worked, but these are the things we can solve later. And it's much, much better before saying, let's kill them now and we'll sort it out later. I think it should be the other way around. A journalist is a civilian, let's not discuss it. We can sort that out maybe if you have a functioning justice system, and then sort it out. But you can't ask a soldier, they aren't the best educated people, to make a judgment on the battlefield, is that a combatant or not? That's not what we want. It has to be clear for everyone, from the highest general to the lowest foot soldier. Journalists are civilians, and civilian lives, not only of journalists, but all civilians, are to be respected in a war situation. There is no discussion. I think any discussion is very, very dangerous.
Oh, yes, I understand your question as an outright provocation, I suppose. But on the other hand, it also raises a twofold philosophical problem. First of all, let us define what sort of crime or ill-doing would be so serious on behalf of journalists that it should be punished by anybody, and then who is enabled to punish them. Yesterday at the opening session, Prime Minister Brnabić, she said a thing that was surprising from the mouth of a politician. She said, we're living in a time, regretting it, where crime is defined by politics. And obviously this is what happened in the case we're talking about 20 years ago. I mean, the crime of those journalists who were killed here in Serbia was just to, I mean, nobody said that they had been warmongering. They were not. They were technical personnel. Their crime was just to serve the regime or the state they were in, just doing their job in the ordinary conditions of doing a journalist's job in a state media. So that how can you define this as a crime? The Rwanda case is another thing. There is obviously warmongering or a hatred discourse, and anyway, who is to punish this? So we are asking ourselves the question of what are moral grounds, objective moral grounds to do or to act in any situation implying people's lives and implying aggression or punishment. Which this is a question not for us but for Dostoevsky.
Which opens the next question. If the media belongs to the enemy side, and of course, should I treat it as an enemy as well? I mean, is anything that is on the enemy side a war propaganda against me? So it may be seen as a legitimate target.
Well, at the time of the bombing, I was working part-time for the New York Times, and the New York Times correspondent, Stephen Erlanger, asked me, that was my job, to watch Radio-televizija Srbije every night, the evening news, and to discern for him the nuances, how RTS is changing the way, how it covers what's happening, and if there are any changes to the official line. And, you know, I really was able to detect these changes, but these were subtle changes. For example, at some point when it was clear that Milosevic was suing for peace, that he realized that the toll that the bombing was taking on the country would not make NATO relent, and that NATO was going to continue. At some point, Milosevic began suing for peace, began talking to the mediators in the conflict, and what disappeared from the evening news at 7:30 was zlikovačka agresija. It was still agresija, it was still a criminal aggression, but it was no longer zlikovačka. And it almost made me laugh at the time. I don't know why they thought zlikovačka was so powerful and so good for stirring morale and for making people angry at NATO. So there were these subtle lines. I never noticed that RTS did anything to incite any hatred, even towards NATO. I thought the reporting was pretty straightforward. Of course, there was a line at the time that the KLA people were terrorists. The KLA was a terrorist organization, and the KLA was a terrorist organization fighting on the ground with American Air Force as its cavalry.
Yeah, but if I can add another log in that fire, but it wasn't unbiased.
No, of course it was not unbiased.
If I'm standing on the other side, I can say, no, these guys are not unbiased. They're biased. They are leaning toward Their own government, and
yes.
government is an enemy.
Oh, I'm not talking about objectivity. What I am saying is that Radio-televizija Srbije lied less than NATO lied at its press conferences. That's all I'm trying to say. So this is not unbiased reporting. This was typical wartime reporting, which really was pretty straightforward. And I need to remind everyone that Hans Fritsch, the key propagandist for Nazis' propaganda ministry during the war, was let go at Auschwitz. At Nuremberg. And later the Germans got him on another charge, but at Nuremberg, this really horribly notorious person who was precisely tasked to incite the German war effort, well, in Nuremberg tribunal said that what he did was legitimate when you try to stir your nation and stir its fighting spirit. So I don't think, certainly RTS not only did not descend to a level of anything that one can compare with Germany or Hitler or anything, but I thought even for the spirit of the time, it really was pretty straightforward. It was publishing NATO's version, and it was publishing and pushing the official version, but it was lying less than those people at the NATO headquarters and their spokesperson.
First of all, I agree with Matthew that not that you asking the question is dangerous, but this is it's very dangerous to start determining who's a real journalist and not a real journalist when the consequences are so lethal. Because we're having this discussion, though, I feel, and we're having it in Belgrade, I feel that it's necessary to draw the parallel to how the international justice system has been applied through The Hague, the World Court, the International Criminal Court. The United States refuses to recognize any international court that would have jurisdiction over its soldiers. In fact, there were major Democratic Party figures who, in the early 2000s, voted with the Republicans in favor of something called the Hague Invasion Act, which was legislation bipartisan supported in the United States. And one of the clauses of that legislation said that if US soldiers or any US personnel are ever taken to The Hague on war crimes charges, that the US military could be authorized to invade The Hague and liberate those Americans. Okay. CNN, the New York Times, were conveyor belts for the lies of the Bush administration. That war killed upwards of 1 million people in Iraq. And these are the people that are going to come and say, these aren't real journalists. These are people that are involved with war crimes. The United States is committing war crimes as we sit here right now in the 9+ countries that it's bombing. And so it's international justice is for savage people like the Rwandans. We need ad hoc tribunals for the former Yugoslavia. But don't talk about Wesley Clark having to answer to an international court for directing bombings intentionally of civilian targets. So the United States created the context for the question that you're asking by claiming that only British and Western European and American journalists are real journalists. If you work for state media anywhere except in Germany, France, or Britain, you're considered a propagandist. And I think we can have a real debate about that. I think there is a history with TV Belgrade and others where there was open, overt propaganda that was intended to shift public opinion in favor of their side's agenda in the war. That is every day on CNN in the United States. That is every day, and it comes with the consequence of lives being taken. So what I find most offensive about this construct that the US has encouraged is that it's all victor's justice. It's all about our propaganda's okay. When we kill civilians, we felt bad about it. But when the Serbs kill civilians, they mean to do it. It's all a big fucking lie.
Okay, calm down with the strong language.
Okay. I know 13 journalists who have been killed since 9/11, 4 of them by American forces. So yeah, I am angry about this. I'm angry about the killing and murder of journalists around the world that continues to this day.
Can I add another question before I let everybody else to answer on this one? Have we had a serious debate on those issues after '99, discussing anywhere, I mean, in any of your countries about what is right and what is wrong in treatment to media during the conflicts, during the wars? Maybe Matthew.
I think we have a problem again, yeah, because I agree with Jeremy. We have, and this is a lovely thing about most of the people sitting here, probably all the people, is we have very high moral values. On the other hand, we're living in a world, you know, the Germans have a word for it, realpolitik, real politics, and that's what Jeremy is describing. We have a world hegemon. We have a lot of dictators and tyrants throughout the world. And you know, the US can do what they want throughout the world, or almost throughout the world. Many others can do in their nation whatever they want to do. They can murder people, they can put them in prison and whatever. And the question is it going to help us much if we're, you know, to roll out what we always roll out, which is moral arguments? I think we all know morally we're right. We also know what the US is doing and what other nations are doing in wars. And I don't know, I just don't know if this is going to bring us any further right now, this discussion, because it repeats itself and people, I don't know what satisfaction people find in this discussion because it doesn't change anything. What I find we have to do is start developing ways to enforce these moral questions. And you know, part of it is the justice system. As you mentioned, we all want a world justice system, but we don't have one. We do have one relatively close. And it is the victors, it is the strong. But I think somehow we have to move on. I'm not quite sure how, but I think if we're going to try to find the moral high ground, I think we're already there. I don't think we have to look for it.
But my opening question was about, is there a set of rules that if you obey as a journalist, you cannot get into a danger, I mean, to be mistreated or to be misunderstood as a target? So I didn't got the real answer. Have you had a debate on this issue about how the journalists should be treated in the conflicts? Matthew.
I answered that. They are civilians, and there's no discussion. But the US decides, as Jeremy was saying, what's right and what's wrong in that war situation. And I'm sure Russia does the same, and I'm sure China does the same. And when you have power, when you're a hegemon, you can do this, and they do it.
Dmitry, was there a debate in Russia on those issues?
Коллеги, вы знаете, темы этики поведения журналиста и границы между тем, что считать и где Рубикон его пропагандистской работы и чистой журналистики, они не начались в 1999 году. 1999 год оголил инструментально, да, мы увидели многие вещи, которые, в общем-то, и до этого использовали страны, инструменты пропаганды, им точно не 20 лет. Но то, что происходило в Сербии, для нас, для всех, это был как раз факт того, что мы наблюдали воочию, каким образом работает пропагандистская машина. Что это позволило сделать нам как выводы? Во-первых, Россия, так же как и весь глобальный мир, имеет разные медиа. И сказать, что Россия отличается принципиально от других стран, что корпоративные или государственные медиа имеют одинаковую политику с малыми медиа, small медиа, это было бы тоже некорректно. В России эти дебаты идут постоянно, они регулярные и являются предметом открытых, нормальных дискуссий.
Well, I feel I have to add one more thing. We are the country that's supposed to have had that debate. It would be normal if we had a debate, and I'm not sure that the results are conclusive even in this country, and we have racked our souls over this event. over the bombing of Radio-televizija Srbije. So I feel while I'm still in this room, I should say that I really deeply resented sitting here last night and hearing somehow that Wesley Clark and, what's his name, Milanović, Dragoljub, that they somehow are both almost equally guilty, and were Wesley Clark, because he said, I'm sorry about those 6 victims, well, there were 16, that he came out even looking a little better because he mouthed the supposed sympathy for the victims, couldn't even remember their numbers a couple of years later. So we've had a debate here. I understand the people who worked at RTS feel terribly let down by their management and blame their management as well for not having secured them and moved them to a safer place. But I am deeply unhappy to this day when somehow this is put on the same level, on the same plane. I think NATO bombed Radio-televizija Srbije, and NATO's responsibility is greater than any other responsibility when we start looking who could have done more to prevent deaths.
Well, was there a debate in Switzerland?
Well, in Switzerland there are lots of debates, but who cares about Switzerland? They're debating constantly about everything. But I would give you an example of the sort of debates we had in Switzerland at the time of this war to illustrate my point on the global question that is being raised by those debates on the responsibility and the position of journalists. The only time in my life I've interacted with anybody through the courts, through lawyers, was in 1991 or 2, when the most influential columnist in Switzerland that is supposed to be a neutral state, called me a ethnic cleansing propagandist in an editorial in his newspaper. And Elizabeth, who is here, knows the guy because she worked for him. It was Jacques Pillet. Where are you, Elizabeth? Oh, she must be away.
She's
okay. And Jacques Pillet, you remember? He called me in an editorial. I was 26 years old. I was not even a journalist. I was a student writing things in my small magazine. And he was calling me a propagandist for ethnic cleansing for one single reason. The reason was not that I had any word or sentence defending the idea or promoting the idea of ethnic purity. My guilt was that I wrote that they had no evidence that there was an ethnic cleansing propaganda coming from official sources in Serbia. I just accused them of fake news. I accused them of spreading fake news about what was the public discourse in Serbia. So the only way I found to get rid of that accusation that was very serious at that time was to obtain the retractation, them to withdraw that accusation. Retraction. So it's the only time in my life ever I dealt with anybody through the justice system. It was a journalist. So I consider that, from my point of view, of course, I don't have bombers. I'm not Mr. Wesley Clark. But from my point of view, this man, who was the boss of Swiss journalists, was not a journalist. He was a legitimate target for my criticism because he was not acting as a journalist at that time. Since then, we talked about that. We sorted out. But at that time, there were no journalists in the West. They were foaming with hatred. They would not take care to investigate about all the fake news they were spreading. We published I was working in a publishing house, we published a book of an inventory of fake news about the war, not the 99 war, but the war from 1991 on. a collection of fake news that was written by a young French journalist. There were hundreds of outright lies, of very gross fake news, of funny things even, about Serbs. So were those media corporations, I mean, the media profession as a whole, were they acting as journalists when they were dealing with Yugoslavia? No, they were not. So, I mean, the only way, first of all, my point is that I completely agree with Matthew. Journalists are civilians. Civilians are not to be attacked. There are conventions punishing the attack of civilians. But we are far now from the spirit and the respect of those conventions. So that journalists are being targeted just like civilians are being targeted. The whole 99 war was about targeting civilians. The Serbian army did not suffer that much. So the point is, if journalists are to be treated as journalists, as some sort of special witnesses to any human situation, they must act as journalists and earn the respect, not only, they will never earn the respect of Mr. Wesley Clark, but to earn respect from ordinary people, from the public, from us, they must act as journalists. They must stay, I mean, clear from all these emotions, hatred, and partial reporting that they have been found guilty of.
Yeah, but if I can just ask, Wesley Clark is taking orders from some other civilians who are saying, you are supposed to act like this, you're supposed to bomb this or not. So it is, in the end, it is civilians who are deciding what is going to happen. It's not only Wesley Clark saying, okay, we're going to bomb this.
Well, but Stalin and Hitler were civilians.
You know, the other thing is, Thomas Friedman, the famed New York Times correspondent who spends a majority of his time talking to taxi drivers and hotel concierges, he wrote in his article defending the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999 that it's not just Milosevic who needs to be punished. It's all of the people who voted for Milosevic. And he even referred to, you know, we can send you back to, I forget the first.
1389.
No, but first he said, we can send you back to 1989, we can send you back to 1389. He knew what he was doing. And he made this argument that people should be collectively punished if they participate in an election that results in a Milosevic being elected. And right now we have Donald Trump as president of the United States. And I wonder what that would sound like, you know, if Russia or China or another country were to say, well, they need to be wiped off the map because 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump, so we should kill all the white women who voted for Donald Trump. That's the kind of argument that was being made by the serious people of the New York Times at that time. And I find it so infuriating that when the United States engages in this kind of conduct, it's, well, that's debate in a democratic society. In other countries, if they engage in that kind of rhetoric, they are stripped of their classification of being journalists and are actively considered combatants, which is why I think it is incredibly dangerous to go down that path of who is, who isn't a journalist. The second point I wanted to make is that the United States has a long history of using the cover of journalism to send spies around the world. This, to me, is one of the absolute most dangerous tactics that the US has used in its espionage, because when you travel, for instance, as I've done, around the Middle East, in war zones, people assume that if you say you're a journalist, you're really with the CIA. I had an incident where I was interviewing a very violent warlord in Somalia, and he was insisting that I am CIA, insisting on it, and it got to a point where I think he actually believed it and was contemplating the cost to him of killing me, you know, on the chance that he's wrong, that I actually am a journalist. That's a very dangerous reality, speaking as an American journalist, to face when you go out into the field. And let's be clear here. When the United States bombed Radio-televizija Srbije and then bombed Al Jazeera's, first they threw Al Jazeera off of the New York Stock Exchange, saying that they're not real journalists. Now they're making RT register as being a foreign agent in the United States, which in and of itself is an outrageously hostile act. Then you had Al Jazeera's headquarters bombed in Kabul. You had Al Jazeera's correspondent Tariq Ayoub killed in Baghdad in a direct strike on the roof where he had been reporting from. 2 days later, you had the Palestine hotel shelled by American forces, killing 3 journalists. Then you had the bombing of a hotel in Basra, Iraq, where Al Jazeera journalists were the only guests there. And we're expressing outrage that ISIS is beheading journalists. Is it because of the tactic that they're using? I think it's a horrid atrocity what ISIS is doing to journalists. But is it any more savage than what the United States does, just because they're using a knife instead of a missile? That's the question that needs to be posed to people who want to run around saying, real journalists, not real journalists. Is there a difference between murdering with a cruise missile and murdering with a knife and videotaping it?
I just want to remind everyone of the fact that those 3 Chinese journalists were here, were killed in the Chinese embassy. And remember how Madeleine Albright dealt with that. She simultaneously wanted people to believe 2 things. One was this was a complete accident. This was a mistake. We never meant to bomb the Chinese embassy. We thought it was an empty building owned by someone else. But then she said, however, the 3 journalists we killed in that embassy mistakenly and accidentally were no journalists. They were spies. They worked for the, they were propagandists for the Chinese government. This is truly, I don't know, for some reason this offended me even more than the explanation for Radio-televizija Srbije, because it went along with this thing. It was an accident. However, American tomahawks, when they kill someone, they always kill the right people, the people who deserve to die. They didn't kill journalists, they killed propagandists.
That's what you call smart bombs.
Я хочу поддержать и Мэтью, и Слободана, и Джереми в части том, что мы действительно ведем очень опасную дискуссию. Ее опасность заключается в том, что само по себе допуск о том, что можно ли считать журналиста негражданским, он опасен сам по себе, да. С одной стороны. С другой стороны, тот вопрос, когда мы размышляем, действительно ли спецслужбы, действительно ли различные органы разных государств используют журналистов как прикрытие, как инструмент в своих политических и в иных войнах. И насколько мы, да, как профессиональное сообщество, имеем на самом деле реальные инструменты оголять эту информацию, действительно показывать и разводить границы именно через реальное пояснение, объяснение населению о том, что где эта граница происходит. И действительно оголять ту ситуацию, когда журналистика перестает быть журналистикой, это и есть наша функция. И даже если журналист, который облечен, и есть реальные факты, что он не выполнял свою основную функцию, да, а выполнял иные какие-то задачи под прикрытием, то даже в этой ситуации он не может попасть в список нежурналистов. В этом смысле это принципиальная гуманитарная позиция, которая у сообщества и общественности, и профессионального сообщества журналистов должна быть. Главное все-таки это говорить факты, а не быть судом или вершителем и определителем.
Oh, yes, I do agree with that, and since there are several representatives here of international and national federations or journalist organizations, I think it would be a huge improvement of their working and living conditions if journalists from all over the world would express much more solidarity among themselves. I mean, what Jeremy told last night about how the US journalists greeted the bombing of this TV outlet was frightening. I mean, they were greeting the killing of their colleagues. anyway. Or if they did not consider those people as colleagues, it means that they did not consider Serbs or whatever sort of Bantus in the world as not non-humans. I mean, I could not imagine a Serbian or a Russian journalist rejoicing for the killing in a military operation, intentional killing of a colleague anywhere in the world by anybody, even Chechens. I mean, I've never seen that. This never happened. And there you see, you know, an assembly of professionals laughing, rejoicing at the killing of their colleagues. This is complete madness.
You know, I was critical last night of the Committee to Protect Journalists on this specific issue. However, I also think that the Committee to Protect Journalists is an incredibly important and brave organization. And I go every year to the annual dinner of the Committee to Protect Journalists, and I'm always struck at that dinner by the stories of journalists from around the world who are either being imprisoned or having their rights violated or being killed. And we're seeing record numbers of journalists being killed around the world. And one of the most unfortunate aspects of how this is discussed in the world is that the nations that are supposed to be this shining light on a hill and about democracy and freedom and human rights are engaging in a legitimization of the killing of journalists themselves. And so it's who can you look to say, this government has the right policy on this, when the most powerful countries in the world have their own sophisticated high-tech mechanism of doing what ISIS has been doing. And it leaves journalists so exposed because it's left entirely to non-governmental organizations, for the most part, to stand up and protect the rights of journalists, which is why Ilyana and I, when we tried to get the Committee to Protect Journalists to reverse its position on Radio-televizija Srbije, it wasn't just about the 16 workers who were murdered. It was about a principle that if you say, well, this set of people, we can't categorize them as media workers, or it was our policy that technical workers weren't, it creates a situation where you go down the dangerous road that Matthew was referring to, where even people who are editors, mixers, makeup artists, hairstylists, what have you, that they become legitimate targets because, what? They were going to do the makeup for Aleksandar Vučić when he was supposed to be there for his CNN interview? They deserve to die for that? That was their role in the propaganda war? I find it so depressing that my government, because there's a lot of great things about the United States, and there's a lot of great politicians who speak the truth on these issues, but the state itself murders journalists. And therefore, its credibility can be called into question like that by any malicious actor.
Yep. Matthew, you wanted to join?
Yeah, I'd like to open up the topic a bit more. I think we were a bit further in the last group, because this is not only a question of governments. It's, if we're quite honest, this has a lot to do with the deterioration of democracy, not only in the US, but also in Europe. And you're seeing it in the assassination of journalists. You know, even we had here we had in Malta, Ms. Koana Galizia. We also had Jan Kucic and his civilian wife who were murdered. It's suddenly becoming acceptable to murder journalists, which it wasn't. You know, this used to be. It's not long ago. I think in Western Europe we would have Western Europe, which is. And Eastern Europe, it was just considered an act of barbarism to kill a journalist. And suddenly, you know, it keeps happening. And it happens here as well. It's just increasing. And it's something we have, as journalists, to react to. Because, you know, this can't go on. And, you know, if we look at the case of Malta, it was, all right, they claim it was a businessman. But what we're getting from, and we have some very, very good investigative journalists say it goes right up to the government. In the case of Slovakia, it's it stopped at, again, a very rich businessman. I don't know if it's going to continue going up into the government, but this is what happened 20 years ago. A red line was crossed, and the thing is, you don't uncross red lines. The only case, I've really sat down and thought for a long time, has this ever happened that you've crossed a red line and gone back internationally? There was one case, it was after the First World War, where they banned chemical and biological weapons, which, oddly enough, in the Second World War, they respected that. Actually, it's an amazing accomplishment. But we're going back into that. We're crossing this red line again, too. So what's going wrong? And I think this has a lot, as I said, to do with the deterioration of democracy. And I think, and now I don't want to make journalists to, the people who are being guilty, but I think journalists are contributing to this sense of they're not part of democracy. They've become, part of what is attacking and deteriorating our democracy. And this is a really serious problem. And let's be quite honest, I've been here just a couple of days. I'm here for the first time, and I had a couple of interviews with Serbian journalists, and they kept complaining, saying, we're completely discredited here. People just say, you journalists, you're corrupt, you're just working for money. This is true throughout Europe. And most of the time, I hate to say this, but a lot of the time it's very, very true. And I think we have something like this. This is phenomenal. And I really thank Vladimir for organizing this. But we journalists don't sit down and say, what can we do to reestablish our democratic credentials and our credibility? We don't discuss this.
Yeah, Dimitri, you wanted to add?
Мэтью, вот по поводу красной линии. Знаете, вот слушал вас и думал о том, что на самом деле на войне вот врач противника – это мой враг или нет? Медицинская служба. И эта этика, которая уже не первое столетие формируется в нашем обществе, она непоколебима. И ответ вроде бы очевиден. Более того, нормы обмена пленными и ранеными, они до сих пор живы и сохраняются. И в этом смысле бывает так, что врач может быть и полковником, и майором противоборствующих сил. Это аналогия. Но даже по отношению к военному врачу мы не готовы применять силу, уничтожать его, потому что он несет спасение, добро. Вы знаете, я через эту метафору хочу задать, Зоран, и вас попросить помочь, поговорить о другой теме. Мы говорим сейчас о той боли, которая уже существует. Это так. Но, пользуясь тем, что мы вместе сейчас, из разных стран приехали, немножко по-разному можем увидеть и помочь друг другу, подсветить какие-то новые понимания, которые бы в креативном таком формате каждый из нас мог предложить. Чтобы, и вопрос соответствующий возникает, а что бы могло действительно стать тем новым механизмом, спусковым, уже не крючком, а спусковым пуском этого нового решения, которое бы позволило бы нам перейти эту грань, не вернуться, а перейти на новую стадию. Когда вопрос о том, что журналист может быть врагом, он будет не актуален. Какой первый шаг вы видите каждый? Что могло бы помочь на пути к этому?
Who wants to answer first? It's a tough one. If I can add, while you are contemplating, if I can add another thing, the journalists were dying. Every year we have, I think, several dozen journalists being killed in various circumstances, conflicts. Usually those are the incidents, or it is labeled as a crime. But bombing of RTS was almost seen as a legal thing. Is that something that differs this event from any other death of a journalist in 1999 and before that?
I think what was different about this is that the United States has, and NATO had ways of disabling the transmission systems of RTS or disabling the satellite. And the US does this regularly around the world where they can essentially turn off the lights in a country, shut down the internet. Despotic regimes use technical methods. They don't have to go and murder the individuals who are tweeting. They can block Twitter. And what I think was sort of a bad evolution in the attacks against journalists is the notion that targeting a building where individuals work rather than even the leadership of RTS, or saying, well, we need to kill you because you're an anchor on RTS. The idea that you bomb the headquarters is...
They can kill the anchor when they bomb the headquarters. The anchor was inside the building.
I'm saying that if their argument was, we want to shut down the propaganda, there were other ways that they could have done that. And to me, that was a serious crossing of a line. It was something unprecedented. And it was compounded by the fact that the vast majority of the people killed were technical media workers. And the continued defense of that action by the United States and the failure of many human rights organizations, with the exception of Amnesty International, to very clearly label it a war crime. I agree with what Matthew said. It was a crossing of a line that you can't go back from.
Yeah. Before I let Slobodan to answer on that or to continue on that, I want to add a little bit. Does that mean that this bombing meant there are circumstances where it is legal to kill media people? We should not necessarily call them journalists, but people working in media. So,
well, that is the argument that the United States has made, and they convinced several people at the ICTY that was the case. But the reason that I brought up the fact that the United States refuses to recognize an international criminal court is personified in that example, that the United States will dictate who is a war criminal and who is a legitimate participant in a war, who is a journalist, who isn't a journalist. And the stamp of legitimacy has already been placed on it. And countries around the world can look at that and say, well, if the United States can do that, why can't we?
Well, I have a remark about what Dmitry has just said, and, well, what could we do? And also about this, about what makes this bombing so particular. I think that the red line that has been crossed is the red line of the obvious public integration of a dissociated political system into a totalitarian system. In a totalitarian system, there's no civilians, there's no safeguards, there's no safe havens. Everything is attackable. You know, when World War II started, the Germans started firing at enemy pilots who were parachuting, although they had stopped being enemies and it was illegal to do it. And why did they do it? To prevent them from attacking them once more? No, just to prove that they could do it, that there was no heavens, there was no exceptions to their power. In a deeply revealing film that you've all seen, it's Wall Street, the young broker who helped Mr. Gordon Gekko buy out a firm and then destroy it asks him in a state of complete distress and anger, but why? Why? The question we raised yesterday. Why did you wreck that firm? And the answer was, because it was wreckable. And why did they bomb the Serbian TV? It's because it was bombable. They could not bomb French TV. They could not bomb a TV of their allies in the Middle East, even if it spread awful lies. But this was wreckable and bombable because all the conditions were united, and especially the moral brakes were turned off. So what can we do? The answer, we have it, we've had it for a very long time. It's contained in a play that's 25 centuries old. It's Antigone by Aeschylus. Antigone, who occupies actually the position of the witness towards a system of power, she says to Creon, you act according to the law, the written law that you wrote by yourself. But I am acting according to the unwritten laws that are universal and that nobody can rewrite. And we all know, although we sometimes deny it, what the universal laws are. You don't kill your neighbor, you don't lie. You don't make false statements. You don't act as a slave and servant to power. You defend you protect your freedom and you don't give your word to pull it back. I mean, the rules of human behavior are the same from China to South America and at least 3,000 years. So there is also a statement, a very, very mysterious sentence in the Book of Tao that's also 25 centuries old, saying the night and disorder of the kingdom, of the empire, imposes truth and good faith. So when you see such a rule of lies, it is the moment and the only way out is to tell the truth and to become trustful to people. And this is a matter of personal choices and personal behaviors and personal credits now in this time. I think that no laws, no tribunals. I agree. I think Elizabeth Levy said that people were relying on tribunals very much. I mean, tribunals are tools of levers of power. They will do what they instructed to, because today justice is not any more independent than media are. So everything we can do to heal this situation, to improve the situation, is within us. Being trustful, telling the truth, and being courageous, and that's it.
Liljan, Matthew, and then I will open a discussion a little bit to, onda ćemo moći da postavimo i pitanja, samo da čujemo Lilju i Matthew. Lilja.
Well, I just wanted to remind everyone why we call this conference Ending Impunity. So there is no way to uncross a red line, and Jeremy demonstrated how after RTS, a lot of other media outlets were targeted. In Serbia, there was this, in 1909, there was this decision to kill a prominent journalist. It was carried out by practically a crack unit and top people at state security, and lo and behold, 4 years later, elite troops of an elite unit of the Serbian government killed their prime minister. So you could see that in the context of crossing red lines as well. Whereas in the case of Wesley Clark, I think possibly the only unpleasant moment he has had in his life connected to killing people here is the one when he ran into Jeremy and thought he would be able to put wool over his eyes, not knowing that Jeremy happened to know the situation. He'd never expected anyone like Jeremy in the boondocks, or where was the...
I was in New Hampshire during the New Hampshire primary.
It's not exactly the boondocks, but
no, he wanted to talk about, like, you know, how great the local cheese is, please vote for me, and that the journalists were just asking him fluff questions.
And it's not just that he couldn't be held accountable, and it's not just that the ICTY had nothing to say on his conduct, but when he came to testify before the ICTY in the Milosevic case, he was treated like a royal witness. The rules of the tribunal were not applied to him. They allowed him to take phone calls on the stand. They apologized to him if Milosevic tried to ask him a question about crimes NATO committed here. But yes, tribunals may be an arm of the state and a tool and everything, but in this country, there's been some accountability for the people who killed Ćuruvije. And I think the head of state security is no small level, no low level, and no small target. But we cannot uncross maybe the red line, but if we could hold someone accountable, and if we could make their lives a little bit, at least a little bit more miserable, and yes, tell the truth and remind people that this happened, I think it's worth trying.
Yeah, Ljiljo, but there is a significant difference. The people who are convicted for the murder of Ćuruvije are denying it, even today, that they had anything to do with it. Wesley Clark is not denying that he was involved in this thing.
Does that make him morally superior?
No, it is just showing that there is a different approach, because usually those who were killing journalists were denying, they were hiring thugs or somebody to do the dirty job for them. This was the case when it was made legal.
But you know what they're not denying in the case of Mr. Ćuruvije? They're not denying that they held him as a traitor. They're not denying the motive, even though they're denying the act. It's very clear, and it's clear from the accusations made against me, that the logic holds, and that they held him in contempt and upheld him to the public as a person of contempt, while people were being assassinated and killed by NATO and losing and worrying about their sons in the military. This man was working with the enemy behind our lines. So that no one has gone back, and this is why I am always stressing this point. None of these people who are accused, yes, they say we didn't do it, but none of them are saying we realized that Mr. Ćuruvije was actually a good journalist and a patriot just like us, who was very contemptuous of NATO and who was very much against NATO's aggression on Yugoslavia.
Matthew.
All right. I'm the last speaker, and last speakers are always required to provide a bit of optimism and a moral message. And the optimism is there, and that is in Slovakia. Let us remember, although it's hardly in the media, after Jan Kucic and his fiancée were killed, people went onto the street. My God, they went onto the street for a journalist who was murdered, and they toppled the government. This is amazing if you think about it. What a value of democracy. And it goes even further. Not like Malta, where not much is happening with prosecution. They've already arrested people, and they are going to be prosecuted, it appears. And not only that, they've now elected a president who's not a member of the corrupt political elite. This is an amazing, we don't value this. This is the success of democracy. It may change, which brings me to the, again, we've had Antigone. I'll go back to Heraclite, even further back. And he once said, defending laws is like defending the walls of the city against an enemy. And what he meant by that is they didn't have democracy when Heraclite lived, but they had rights. Those were the laws. And what we have to do, and we keep forgetting that, and we get tired and we get old, is every time we see an attack upon our rights, which is our democracy, we have to put on our armor, we have to climb up to the top of the wall, and we have to defend it. And that is what the Slovaks did. They defended it, and they defended it brilliantly.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Pa ne znam hoće li ovo biti pitanje, ali kolega...
Mikrofon samo malo bliže, molim vas.
Kolega pomenu riječ demokratija, a meni u kontekstu povoda zbog kojeg smo se okupili, riječ demokratija može samo da se prevede u termin raketokratija. Jer ja nikako da shvatim da se demokratija u onom teorijskom smislu brani i da se štiti tomahavcima. Tako je ime najpoznatije američke rakete. Ja sam Marko Divković i dolazim iz Bosne i Hercegovine i jako mi je neugodno da čujem sve ove diskusije i čini mi se da smo malo licemjerni. Pominje se i Malta, pominje se i Slovačka, niko ne pominje Bosnu i Hercegovinu. Prošle godine smo imali pokušaj ubistva kolege Vladimira Kovačevića iz BN televizije. U prosjeku imamo sedmično jedan napad na novinare, različitih oblika. Od onih da mu razbiju kameru do onoga da mu razbiju glavu. Kad je riječ o bombardovanju RTS-a, nakon bombardovanja u Tuzli, odakle ja inače dolazim, svađao sam se sa našom kolegicom Mirjam, ona je inače iz Rotterdama. Kad sam se usprotivio u razgovoru s njom bombardovanju, ona je rekla, a jel ti RTS smatraš televizijom? Dakle, to je u kontekstu politike koju je stvarao Zapad, pravdajući i nalazeći razloge za bombardovanje RTS-a. RTS je, da se razumijemo, u to vrijeme, a ja sam svjedok toga, lagao. Pomenut je slučaj, kolega s Kosova je malo prije pomenuo, odnosno bio je tada na Kosovu, stadion kao veliki logor. U vrijeme kad je RTS objavio vijest da je stadion Tušanj u Tuzli logor za Srbe, ja sam s pukim slučajem sjedio u stanu jedne Beograđanke, a stan je na 3. spratu s kojeg se vidi, i danas je taj stan tamo, ona je umrla u doduše. Odakle se vidio taj stadion. Ona je zvala sestru u Beograd i pitala šta se to događa, šta lažete. Ako bismo, završit ću ovim, našli ikakvu, a bojim se da je tu bilo nekih diskusija, makar milimetar objašnjenja u smislu pravdanja, raketiranja RTS-a, onda bismo našli i neko opravdanje za bombardovanje moje radio-televizije Bosne i Hercegovine, koju ovdje niko nije pomenuo. Da li sam ja to primijetio da neko traži razloge za bombardovanje RTS-a i bilo koje medijske kuće, čak i u Ruandi i bilo gdje? Ja sam principijelno protiv da se na riječ i sliku bilo gdje, bilo kada i bilo zašto ide bombama, raketama ili granatama. To će nas vratiti, znate već gdje. Hvala.
Hvala. Who wants to react on this? Slobodan.
Gospodine, moja pokojna baka koja je isto bila iz Bosne i Hercegovine uvijek je govorila, pošto je preživjela Drugi svjetski rat, da ne ubijaju reči nego meci. Ja mislim da je ovdje upravo cilj da se nađu razlozi da se ne bombarduje nikakva televizija i da se ne ubija nikakav novinar, a ne da se sad nalaze razlozi da se to čini. Mislim da je obratno. Jer razloga da se to čini među političkim silama ima dovoljno. Ja mislim da su ovdje svi okupljeni zato da bi se ti razlozi njima oduzeli.
Anyone else wants to add? Or we can see if there is any other. Imamo još neko pitanje? Pardon, imamo.
Ja sam Đorđe Mamula. Mislim da bi trebalo da se bavite i uzrocima, a ne samo posljedicama. Drugo, ja mislim da treba se boriti da dođe do kraju ubijanju građana i da to pitanje stalno držite otvorenim. Od kako su bombardovani Hirošima i Nagasaki, kako je globalizovan strah i kako je druga strana došla do atomske bombe i kako živimo u ravnoteži straha, niste vi više samo novinari. Vi ste civili, ali zapravo vojnici na odsustvu. Niste vi samo rezervisti kao novinari, vi ste vojnici na odsustvu. I tu je neka kasarna u koju ćete doći kad tad, jer se stvara atmosfera da ste vi zapravo vojnici na odsustvu. I počnite o tome da govorite. Počnite o tome da govorite još nešto. Počnite se bavite time koje se banke povezane sa trgovinom oružjem. Otkrivajte preko kojih banaka u svetu i ovdje se trguje oružjem. Kako biste pozvali građane da povuku svoje depozite iz tih banaka, jer i to je prigovor savjesti.
So, anybody wants to react on this being actually a conscript while a journalist?
Civilian, any civilian.
Or Jeremy?
No.
Would you ever consider yourself as being just, a conscript on the leave? Or you think you're a journalist, you cannot be connected with the army anyhow?
have never contemplated that question. I mean, I do think that once you make a decision, and I'm sure the colleague from Bosnia that spoke also would agree with this, sort of in a way, becoming a journalist is sort of a red line that you cross in life, because once you sort of get into that world, it becomes very difficult to stop it, or to extricate yourself from it. And but I don't use military terms to describe my my professional work. I find it very hard to walk around and think I'm something other than a journalist. I can't separate myself from that identity, which is not a good thing. I think we also need to have lives.
Okay, if I can add one question, and that would be, what are the greatest present dangers for the lives of the journalists? Matthew mentioned some of them, but what are, I mean, is that the war situation, or is that reporting on corruption? What would you say are the greatest dangers for the journalists today? Matthew, can I ask you first?
All right. I don't think, I hate rankings, so I'm not going to do this. Let's look at journalists who've been killed in the last 20 years, starting with due to wars, which is inexcusable. I think we're all agreed on that. And by the way, what you said is on the one hand right, saying, well, what about Bosnia-Herzegovina? We can't include everything. This is really very, very unfair to journalists. I think every time they mention something, they have to mention all the cases. We don't do that, we can't do that. And to be quite honest, I didn't even know. I'll admit it. All right, the next thing is we see, due to corruption in business and in politics, people are being killed. We don't talk about Charlie Hebdo. They were killed for I quite don't know how to define, because they wrote something that was unpopular for people, radical Islamists. And it's all wrong. It doesn't matter.
Well, hold on 1 second. I take offense at that. It's not just about, it was offensive to radical Islam. It was offensive to a vast majority of Muslims in the world. Every single Muslim I know was completely offended by the imagery that they had created of the Prophet Muhammad. And that is the line that Western governments took on this, was that it was, it offended Al-Qaeda and ISIS so much that they went and did this. But in fact, there was a huge discussion about this in the Islamic world, because it was a direct provocation of their religion. I support the right of Charlie Hebdo to have done that, but this was not just offensive to radical Islamists. This was offensive to, I would venture to say, the vast majority of Muslims in the world.
Listen, every day I look at the media, open a newspaper, I'm offended, but I don't, and I think many people are. But we don't go out and kill journalists.
No, I'm just saying, the only thing I was objecting to is the notion that it was just offensive to radical Islamists. I mean, this was extremely offensive to many, many people who loathe everything that Al-Qaeda and ISIS stand for. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just took...
I apologize if it was inaccurate, but there's a difference between being offended and going out and killing journalists. And
yeah, it was a heinous, horrid massacre of them. Yes, I agree with you.
Okay, so is it dangerous to be a journalist today? Who wants to answer?
The greatest threat right now to journalists in the world is not really what we're discussing. It's the most severe threat, the threat of assassination or being killed, or even unintentionally being killed. Just being a journalist in Syria right now is horrifying. The greatest risk, I think, to many journalists is surveillance on them and their communications and the spying on them by nation states, because it is exposing not just the journalists to state surveillance, but potentially allowing governments then to figure out who is leaking the information to journalists, who's speaking to journalists, and then going and targeting them. One of the consequences of surveillance on journalists is that sources then can be arrested, or worse, or killed. And I think there's a real serious discussion to be had about the responsibility of journalists in source protection. But even with the best encryption and privacy practices, nation-state actors can always break in. Russia can do it, the US can do it, Israel certainly can do it. So I think that's the greatest threat to many journalists is surveillance on them and by proxy their sources by state actors or other hostile entities in the private sector or private world.
So that is the danger to their professional work, but is it endangering them in the matter of being a target, being a life threatened? Jeremy, I mean.
Yes, I mean, Matthew was just, citing a journalist killed in Malta who, if I'm correct, she was working on the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers, correct?
Working corruption in the banks and government of Malta.
Right, but she was also part of the reporting, the international consortium of journalists. Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure that I got it right because I'm not super familiar with that story. But that can then result in assassination or physical harm if governments are spying on you and they determine that you've been talking to enough important people or you're exposing bank criminals, financial criminals, international syndicates. Yes, it can result in a direct threat to the life of journalists, the lives of journalists. Yeah.
Imamo li još neko pitanje? Imamo ovdje. Evo mikrofon.
Yeah, Jeremy Deere from the International Federation of Journalists, and I think the greatest danger journalists face today is speaking truth to power. And it doesn't matter whether that is government power or paramilitary power or business power or criminal or religious. It is journalists telling the truth who are the most in danger. And yet, when we hear these discussions, we talk about less journalists out there telling the truth than maybe there was in the past. And maybe we have to analyze some of the reasons why many journalists feel less empowered today to speak truth to power. Impunity is undoubtedly part of that. The targeting and the stigmatization by those in power is undoubtedly part of that. But also the societal change in the imbalance in power between those who have and those who do not have the power. So media corporations are more powerful. Their journalists are less powerful. Governments in many cases are more powerful compared to citizens in many countries. And if journalists are citizens, then they also often lack the power. More work in precarious circumstances, more are forced into being freelancers, fewer have labor rights within the workplace. And all of these issues need to be addressed if we are to give journalists the tools to be able to have the power to feel the solidarity that was talked about, to feel the ability to be able to stand up and challenge those who are in power, whether it's in Serbia, the United States. It used to be that more people were killed in war, in Iraq, in Syria. Last year, it was Mexico and the Philippines. Yes, there's a kind of war, but it is about people investigating the corruption and the political power that is paid for by the drug cartels and things like that. And you need to empower. If journalists are at the forefront of the problem, they also have to be at the forefront of the solution as well.
So if I ask you I wanted to ask you to define the question you would like us to answer. Yeah, that was the comment. I was hoping that.
What I want to know is what can be done to help empower journalists to stand up to power.
Okay, it's a tough one.
But I'd be curious to hear Dimitri's answer on this because it relates to the question that he asked that only Matthew and Slobodan took a stab at. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, given what our colleague here has just said as well.
Спасибо, Джереми. Вы знаете, действительно, если посмотреть на журналистику и составлять какой-то определенный индекс профессий повышенной опасности, то за последние десятилетия журналистика поднимается в этом рейтинге все выше и выше. И становится в один ранг самыми опасными профессиями, которые существуют в нашем мире. Степень опасности, конечно, определяется внутренней этикой самого журналиста. И этот факт сам по себе, он пугающий. И за ним лежат другие вещи, более страшные, которые можно назвать это самоопределение человека в новом мире. Для меня журналистика — это, вот если представить такую органическую теорию, представить, да, что наш мир — это как вот наш организм, как тело, да, то журналисты — это глаза, это мои глаза, моего мира. И если мои глаза будут закрываться от фактов, от правды, то, скорее всего, я могу споткнуться и упасть. Поэтому действительно есть признаки того, что журналистика становится профессией все больше и больше опасности. Но еще больше пугает тот факт, что нет признаков того, что есть какие-либо механизмы, это я возвращаюсь к своему вопросу, которые действительно могут значительно изменить ситуацию. Единственные механизмы, даже это не механизмы, а наша роль журналистов в повышении своей безопасности, с одной стороны, а с другой стороны, повышение безопасности для всего общества заключена в двух областях – культура и образование. Только через постоянный контакт с аудиторией, пояснением и рассказом не только о новостях, а о том, почему я так делаю, ньюсмейкинг, создаю эту новость, почему она такая, что меня подвигает как социально ответственного человека, да, как журналиста, к тем поступкам, которые, я считаю, не можно не умолчать, о которых необходимо говорить. Это образовательный контекст, это культурологический контекст. Постоянное общение с своей аудиторией, которое помогает поднять уровень медиаграмотности своей аудитории. Это второй механизм, без которого, мне сложно представляется будущее профессии. Джереми?
Thank you. Matthew, you wanted to add. And I thought, Matthew, you wanted to add something.
No.
Oh, no. I thought that you were.
There's a slight delay, with the translation, so that's why we were. Yeah, that's why we were. That's why we were all pausing. Yeah.
Sorry for that.
We were still listening to Dimitri.
Okay. Imamo li još neko pitanje? If not, I can add another issue in the next 15 minutes that we can discuss, and that is the role of social media that didn't exist 20 years ago, didn't exist in a true sense 10 years ago. But are they also creating the atmosphere that can be dangerous for journalists, and in what way? Okay, Slobodan is like a good target for this question.
Well, I don't know. Well, it's the rise of social media in the last 10 years reminds me of what happened in Russia during the perestroika, when they switched from a state-controlled information system to a system where the people in charge, the power, said, speak out, write, shout, whatever you want. We don't care. And it was a very effective way for the rulers to overcome a period of crisis at the end of the Soviet Union. When you open all the dams and you let these things flow, for some time you lower the pressure, and then the pressure starts to build up again on some points. I think that it is. I'm not professionally. I've never been to a school for journalism. I don't have a journalist's ID card. But to me, it's a very awkward situation when you have all those sources, all those comments, all those blogs being treated, or potentially being treated, as equivalent to serious investigative work. it deteriorates not only the quality of information, it deteriorates the quality of language. For instance, in the French domain where I work, I've noticed that now professional journalists writing in still printed newspapers, they're starting to write like illiterate bloggers. So, I mean, it's all gone down that big river of apparently free expression, of relaxed and uncontrolled language, of trolling, of sort of emotional take on everything, and it just takes us back to the point where it all started. We all need to find ourselves trustful, reliable, readable, understandable sources and voices to restart understanding the world from there. For instance, I can give my own example because I know it well. 4 years ago, three and a half years ago, we started a newsletter with a friend of mine who was a professional journalist, chief editor in Swiss newspapers, and we called it the Anti-Press. We would just send a weekly letter on Sunday mornings to our friends and to our readers, saying things, commenting the news of the week, in a high language, in a literate language, and with a sort of freedom of expression that was not common within the profession. And we gained a huge public with that. And people, it was an experiment for us because people would write us back. And in fact, what happened with the with the explosion of social media is that people were complaining about the classical media for behaving like amateurs and bloggers. So now we're back to redefining, I suppose, the profession, because you must redefine the way people are getting paid. You must redefine the way they protect their sources, as Jeremy said. You must redefine even core concepts as what is objectivity, what is subjectivity, what is opinion, and what is information in an article, so that I think we did not make a big progress in those, let's say, 10 or 12 years, apart the fact that it's become much harder to hide some basic and big facts than it used to be.
Jeremy first, and then Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, in a way it is, Twitter and Facebook are like what we say, in the U.S., it's like the Wild West in a sense. And it's a great democratizing force at its best. And it also takes away the monopoly on the dissemination of information from handfuls of established media organizations, and there's a lot. But you
can get lynched in.
No, I'm getting there. I'm starting with the good, which is that I think there's been tremendous benefit to having those streams of independent information, and particularly in a breaking news situation when you simply want to see for yourself what's happening. And we saw that throughout the uprisings in the Arab world, where social media did play a very serious role, and the despotic governments viewed it as an absolute threat. They spent infinitely more resources going after social media than establishment news organizations because of that. The flip side of it, you could go look at my Twitter feed. I posted a picture last night about I have about 350,000 followers on Twitter, which is a decent number for a journalist. I posted a picture of the building and the ceremony and the candles. A lot of people had never heard of this before and said they wanted to look into it. Some people said, thank you for sharing this and for observing the murder of these media workers. But go on my Twitter feed and see how hatred was just being hurled at me. I'm pro-Serb. I deny the genocide in Bosnia. I won't tell the truth about what RTS really was. People can make you feel like you're the smartest, greatest person in the world, the bravest journalist, and then the next minute they can tear you down and make you feel like you're like vermin on the street. That's the reality of that horrid cesspool that we're all participating in. It can be great, and it can be absolutely evil. I also think we'd be remiss in not pointing out this situation with Julian Assange is going to have far-reaching implications for news organizations. The United States government has an extradition request in for him to be returned to the United States, and what they've charged him with right now is conspiracy, saying that he played a role in facilitating Chelsea Manning accessing these large volumes of files when she was Bradley Manning and was in the US military. And if Assange did in fact participate in the hack, so to speak, then he crossed a line. But that hasn't been proven yet. And what the US is really angry about with him is not Hillary's emails. It's that he facilitated the exposure of numerous war crimes. He humiliated American diplomats around the world because what they actually think was published. And the US is smart in how it's doing this, because they're going to try to charge him with some technical thing to get the extradition. Once he comes to the United States, they can pile on charges against him. And it's really disheartening to see so many important journalists in the US, including journalists for papers that published on their front pages all of these documents, either being silent about what's happening to Assange or saying, well, Assange isn't a journalist or he's not a real publisher. It brings us full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning. You don't have to like Julian Assange. I have serious questions about his individual conduct. But my God, he was 7 years in one room, basically. He was losing his mind. I went to the embassy to visit him. He looks like Rip Van Winkle now. I mean, he's got this huge beard. This is a serious case, and what is at heart is not Hillary's emails or the DNC emails. It is that the empire needs to take its pound of flesh out of this guy for exposing crimes and humiliating, and rightfully so, many American diplomats for their duplicity around the world.
Matthew.
We, about a year and a half ago, started a website. We decided to go on to internet media. It's called Brave New Europe. And the first question we had, and I think this is probably the most important question, was we want to achieve credibility. This is what you have to do. And I know I'm going to really upset everyone right now. We said, what are 2 ways to achieve credibility? And we said, we are not going to have any politicians writing or commenting, and we aren't going to have any journalists writing or commenting for us. Good, we've broken both rules. That's what rules are for. But
who's going to be writing?
Well, that's what we've done is, it might not be the case in Serbia, it's not the case in most of Europe, but there's a lot of very leftist, progressive academics who write well. There's a lot of NGOs who really know their stuff. And there's also activists who really know their stuff. And when they write for us, it's really very, very credible. And the other thing is, and this was important too, is we have a very broad church. That means we don't say, here's the right answer. We say, here's the question, here are answers to it. And also maintaining what you were fearing within the website. We don't let people become personal. The comments don't go on the website. The authors, when one wants to comment on something another author has written, we don't let it be personal. We say you can discuss ideas, but you don't say this person is stupid or this person has. We don't do that. And it's working. It's a very, very slow process. And with what I always find very amusing is we don't have any money. So our advertising is mainly Twitter and Facebook. And quite often, what we do, all right, this is what journalists can do. You can write these lovely headlines which really interest people. We've discovered that quite often the tweet that we send out has more likes and retweets than people are reading the article, which says a lot about our Twitter and Facebook function. And it's a really difficult animal, working on internet. And I agree too. It has lots of hope and it has lots of drawbacks. It can be very encouraging, it can be very dangerous. And I think it's something a lot of us are just trying to develop.
I think it's also making us dumber as people, the social media, because it's, you have to distill your thought down to 200, and now it's 280 characters. It used to be 140 characters. That's really bad for us as a human race to have to distill. You know, we've been up here for 2 hours, you know, and we still, there's still so much left hanging from the questions that you ask. But it's like, if you can't put it into 280 characters, it's not worth saying. And that's really problematic. That's really dangerous
Well,
too.
somebody was tweeting about what you were saying here, so.
Yeah.
Okay, Dmitry and then Lilia.
Социальные сети для журналиста, для журналистики могут быть как и спасением, так и гибелью. Попробую пояснить на примерах. Социальная сеть Facebook. В 2018 году более 80 изменений пользовательских алгоритмов провела. К чему этот факт? К тому, что в реальности, если у вас еще не образована аудитория, и даже если она не образована, то гигант Facebook может, в общем-то, смело управлять тем, какой контент от вас и кому попадет. И эффекты глобализации приводят к тому, что большая зависимость и удовольствие от потребления контента в социальных сетях приводит к большей зависимости от оператора. Факт номер 2. Объем контента, уникального контента, который производят профессиональные медиа, не падает. Меняются каналы доставки. Они расширяются. Ну, это нормальная трансмедийная политика, да, современных медиа. И все понимаем, мы все понимаем, что молодая аудитория, там, поколение Z или по-другому, давайте как удобно называть, все-таки это цифровая аудитория, которая живет по законам цифрового пространства. Соответственно, влияние на нее в потенции, да, в будущем потенциале будет снижаться. Потому что не журналист будет определять, кому какой контент попадет, а в первую очередь большие глобальные цифровые гиганты. Это большой риск и вызов журналистики. И здесь есть большая вероятность попасть в этот капкан. С другой стороны, дальнейшая фрагментация, которую мы видим, да, в целевых аудиториях каждого медиа, каждого журналиста отдельно, будет приводить к большей поляризации мнений, к большей вариации мнений, что в свою очередь тоже будет фактором, который может повлиять на то, что единое общее информационное пространство будет менее возможно, если вы не имеете доступ к алгоритмам. Поэтому думаю, что социальные сети, с одной стороны, будут создавать малые аудитории, small media для small group, а с другой стороны, будут еще больше влиять на общественную позицию и, к сожалению, будут управляться гигантами индустрии. Интернет становится дороже. И это один из признаков того, что свободный голос будет из него выдавливаться и далее. У меня все.
So, yes, well, first I just need to say that I am not one of those believers in the deterioration of democracy. I don't think democracy is deteriorating. I don't know what the golden era was. What was it? The McCarthy era after the Second World War? The Margaret Thatcher era in Britain? So I think democracy is doing fine, and I think a lot of people defined the golden era when our political class was fully in charge and in authority, and we didn't have these upstarts, these brash upstarts that we like to call the populists, because we're pissed that they can win votes and that they're bringing some social classes to choose governments that the lower strata of society that did not used to decide of who was in power. And, you know, they didn't like the elites, so they decided to get rid of some elites and elect Donald Trump, and as far as I'm concerned, that's perfectly fine. But I am also, so I'm delighted with Facebook and Twitter, and I think it's wonderful that we can see how people, what sways people, how they act and everything, but I have absolutely no patience for my colleagues who complain all the time about being lynched on social media. And I assure you that I'm sincere because I get lynched all the time on social media. And it really, it's wonderful to look at, but I don't think it's the job of journalists to be popular. And I don't think we should try to be popular. And I don't think we should try to win points with mobs on Twitter and Facebook. And if I had one word of advice for young journalists, it would be do not, I mean, you can open a Twitter account, but do not tell us everything that comes to your mind, because what has been devastating to me from watching people's Twitter accounts, it's been this thing, that people I held in high regard, people I considered serious journalists, they have shown themselves to be petty, narrow-minded, mean-spirited, and sometimes worse things. And I do not know why people like to exhibit this. Why would anyone exhibit these awful things about themselves?
But if I can add just one thing about the social media, are you in fear, and it's not only about Lily, but are you in fear of being labeled on social media as something? Are you in fear than walking the street and seeing somebody who may be reading that and thinking of you as an evil person? Thinking that it is a regular and legal thing to do some harm to this evil person that he never met?
Look, I mean, this has been happening to me for the last 20 years. And if I'm not in fear of these state security people that I think are vindictive, and that I worry that sometimes they think, boy, I'm going to shut her fucking big mouth, and I'm sorry about
the strong language.
The strong language that you criticize Jeremy for. So if I can live with that threat, I certainly can live with the threat of people on the street not liking me. Thank God, people on the street mostly like me.
Imamo još jedno pitanje koje sam propustio. Aha, izvolite.
Działa to? Aleksander Wierzejski, Telewizja Republika, Warsaw, Poland. My question was triggered by Jeremy because you said that your gazillion of your followers on Twitter thinks still that the word associated with Serbia is genocide. I happen to come from the country that in the world is associated with Polish death camps, because obviously there were no other death camps than Polish during the Second World War. And my question to you as a Serbian citizen, Serbian patriots, representatives of Serbian journalism is, what do you do to deliver the fair message about what happened in your country 20 years ago to the world? That's the question.
So what do we do to deliver that message? I would say, in my name as a journalist, I'm trying to do my job professionally, to investigate everything and to give a fair image, a fair story to whoever it reads or watches. I don't think there's anything else that you should be doing, just doing your job in a proper way.
You're facing a hostile reception. You're facing a hostile reception where people already have set their minds on something, and if you say, well, this fact doesn't happen, it didn't change their opinion at all.
Sometimes, I mean, you always face, of course, some hostility. But the thing is, with the social media, now I can really learn about that. In the past times, I could feel that such things exist, but I wouldn't know. With social media, I have an evidence that somebody is being hostile towards me or towards any of our colleagues. That is the difference that was made. And also, it can be accelerated by the social media, because those people who are reading those messages may become encouraged to say or to change their opinion or to start thinking in the same way, which might be dangerous. And I'm sorry for taking the stand because I'm just a moderator here.
Well, I mean, you're asking a more pointed question about Serbian journalists coming to terms with what happened in the 90s, and it's not just Serbian journalists; it's from all around the region. I am not Serbian, but I was living here for a number of years after the '99 bombing, And just one point of fact that I think is important here, when B92, at the time, the television station, decided to broadcast live proceedings at The Hague, the Milosevic trial and others. I believe RTS also was broadcasting parts of it.
Longer than B92.
Yeah,
the very beginning.
But you could watch this live on television, and I thought it was the discussion around the issues in some of those cases that then broke out into the media. I think it was a very interesting development. I mean, Ljiljana actually would be a very interesting person to answer your question because she came from Bosnia, was at Oslobođenja, and then has also edited Politika. I think it would be very interesting to hear her reflection on that.
But it's a totally long story, so I don't
Yeah,
think we have time.
I would say it might be, but
You're censoring.
First of all, we're at the very end, so maybe we can talk during the lunch about those issues. I hope you got the chance to answer anything, to say anything you wanted on this panel, that we had enough time. I hope that I didn't left out anybody who really wanted to ask something. And we had one question there. I will let you just briefly.
Izvinjavam se što se na samom kraju, probat ću da budem veoma kratak. Nije pitanje, samo jedna konstatacija i primjer kako netačna ili lažna vest, kakve posljedice može da donese, a radi se upravo o ratnom periodu. Dolazim iz Kruševca, novinar sam u Kruševcu, za goste iz drugih zemalja, da kažem da je Kruševac grad na jugu Srbije. Područje je veoma blizu Kosovu i Metohiji. Za vreme rata 99, odnosno NATO agresije, nekoliko hiljada ljudi je bilo angažovano u jedinicama iz tog područja i bili su upravo na prostoru Kosova i Metohije. Tamo jedina komunikacija, odnosno jedini izvor informacije koje smo mogli da imamo za to vreme su bili radioaparati i uglavnom Radio Beograd i nekoliko radiostanica tipa BBC-a i Slobodne Evrope najčešće. Neposredno u drugoj polovini maja u Kruševcu je došlo do demonstracija koje su uglavnom predvodile žene, majke i ćerke velikog broja muškaraca koji su bili na Kosovu, tražeći da se oni vrate i da napuste to ratno područje. Prvu informaciju i jedinu informaciju koju su ljudi dobili o tome je upravo bila posredstvom radiostanica, i to inostranih radiostanica. Svi ti rezervisti su slušali tokom večeri i tokom noći izveštaje na Slobodnoj Evropi i BBC-u, gde je rečeno da je došlo do velikih demonstracija u Kruševcu i da je tadašnja vlast, vojska i policija primenila silu nad tim ženama. Kontrainformacije nije bilo, to niko nije demantovao, čak ni od predstavnika vojnih vlasti. To je izazvalo da je nekoliko hiljada ljudi sa tog područja u uniformama samoinicijativno krenulo za Kruševac da bi zbog brige za članove svoje porodice. Kad smo stigli i kad je jedan broj ili nekoliko hiljada ljudi došlo u Kruševac, mi smo saznali da tog dana jesu bile demonstracije, ali nije bilo nikakvog nasilja protiv njih. Samo sam to hteo da ilustrujem kao jedan primer, da ne govorimo koliko je ugrožen stepen bezbednosti tih ljudi koji su samoinicijativno krenuli od NATO avijacije, jer su bili u velikoj grupi, kao i oni koji su ostali tamo, koji su bili izloženi i šiptarsko-terorističkim bandama i takođe NATO avijaciji. Hvala.
Hvala i za ovaj dodatak i ja se zahvaljujem svima i pozivam vas sve na ručak koji je poslužen ovde u holu. I da pomenem, u 2 sata idemo ovde gore do spomenika Zašto. U 2:06 tačno ćemo obeležiti bombardovanje, odnosno trenutak, 12 sati kasnije trenutak kada je RTS pogođen.